I didn't want to go. I told Karen that when she first brought it up earlier in the week, standing in the kitchen with a glass of Chardonnay in her hand and her voice just a little too bright. Emily and Jack's party is Friday. You're coming, right? She said it like it wasn't a question, like there was only one answer. I could have said no. I wanted to, but I've been saying no too much lately, and I knew it. So I nodded, even though the thought of small talk with Emily's crowd made me feel like someone had put weights on my chest. By the time Friday rolled around, I was already running on fumes. Work had been hell all week, deadlines piling up, emails I didn't even want to open, let alone answer. I came home, loosened my tie, and was halfway through a beer when Karen walked in, all dressed up, looking like she was ready to conquer the world. "Are you seriously wearing that?" she said, eyeing my shirt. I sighed, put the beer down, and went upstairs to change. Emily and Jack's house was exactly what I remembered. Big, sleek, full of people who seemed to know how to be effortlessly charming. I felt out of place the second I stepped inside, like I always do. Karen, though, she fit right in. She glided through the crowd, laughing, her voice carrying just enough to make sure everyone knew she was there. I stayed near the bar. It felt safer there, tucked into the corner with a glass of whiskey and a view of the room. I watched Karen move from group to group, her hands gesturing as she talked, her laugh bubbling up at just the right moments. She was good at this, at being the person everyone wanted to talk to. Me? Not so much. I tried, at first. A couple of people came over, Jack, with his big grin and expensive watch, and Lucy, who started talking about some art show I didn't know anything about. I nodded, said the right things, but my heart wasn't in it. I just couldn't do it tonight. So I sat down in one of those oversized leather armchairs in the corner and let the noise of the party wash over me. My glass of whiskey was half empty, the ice melting into it. I thought about getting up, about finding Karen and pretending like everything was fine, but I didn't. And then she was there, standing over me. "Do you have to sit here like this?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. I looked up at her. She was beautiful, her hair perfectly curled, her dress hugging her in all the right places. But there was something in her eyes, something hard, like steel. "Like what?" I asked. "Like this," she said, gesturing at me like I was some kind of exhibit, "like you'd rather be anywhere else. People are noticing, Ryan." I wanted to tell her that I did want to be anywhere else, that these parties drained me in ways she didn't seem to understand. But I just took another sip of my drink and said, "So? So?" Her voice got sharper, louder. "So, it's rude. Emily and Jack went to all this trouble, and you're just sitting here like some sulking teenager." I felt something in my chest tighten, like a rubber band pulled too far. I didn't want to fight, not here, not now. But she wasn't letting this go. "God, Ryan, if you're going to be like this, why did you even come?" she snapped. "Honestly, you're embarrassing yourself." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't say anything. I just set my glass down on the table and stood up. Her eyes widened, just for a second, like she hadn't expected me to actually leave. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the house, past the other guests, past the sound of laughter and music, and into the cold night air. I didn't go home that night. After I left the party, I drove aimlessly through the city, trying to push down the knot in my chest. Portland's streets were quiet, the rain misting over the windshield, the wipers dragging back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm. I kept the radio off. Silence felt better somehow, less crowded. I ended up parking in a lot near Forest Park. It was one of those places we used to hike back when we first moved here, before life got so heavy. I killed the engine and just sat there, staring into the darkness, my breath fogging up the window. Her words kept playing in my head. "You're embarrassing yourself." Maybe I was. God knows I've been dragging myself through each day, feeling like I'm barely holding it together. But hearing it come out of her mouth, sharp and public, in front of all our friends, that hit harder than I thought it would. I couldn't face going home. Not yet. I stayed out until the sky started to lighten. When I finally drove back into the city, I didn't head home. Instead, I went to a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and a front desk clerk who doesn't ask questions. I turned my phone off and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to take my shoes off. The next morning, I woke up to a stiff neck and the glaring realization that I couldn't avoid Karen forever. I turned my phone on, and as expected, there were several missed calls and a couple of texts. One of them just said, "Where are you?" I stared at it for a long time before calling her. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Ryan?" Her voice was tight, sharp around the edges. "Yeah," I said, my tone flat. "Where are you?" "I needed time to think," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "To think about what?" she demanded. "Ryan, you can't just leave like that. It's childish." Her words stung, but I kept my tone calm. "I'm not ready to talk about this, Karen. I just need some space." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her clenching her jaw. "Space? Ryan, you can't just—" I hung up before she could finish. Not my proudest moment, but I couldn't handle another argument. Not yet. I spent most of the day in the motel room, the TV droning on in the background while I tried to make sense of everything. I know I've been distant. I know I haven't been the easiest person to be around. But it feels like every time Karen and I try to talk, we're speaking 2 different languages. She wants me to be someone I'm not sure I can be anymore, and I don't know how to tell her that. The thing is, I love her. I always have. But lately, it feels like we're on opposite sides of a widening canyon, shouting at each other and hoping the other person will build a bridge. That afternoon, I finally turned my phone back on and scrolled through Karen's texts again. She didn't apologize, didn't ask if I was okay. It was all about her. "Where are you? Are you coming home?" For a moment, I thought about responding, about telling her the truth, how I've been feeling lost and stuck and like I'm failing her. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I left my phone on the nightstand and tried to sleep. The next morning, I decided it was time to go home. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Karen's car parked neatly in its spot. The curtains in the living room were drawn, and the house looked just like it always did. Tidy, perfect, like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I stood there for a moment, staring at the front door, wondering what I'd say when I walked in. And then I realized I didn't have the words. Not yet. It took me a couple of days to work up the nerve to call Karen. I'd spent most of that time pacing around my motel room, trying to figure out what I even wanted to say. Every conversation we'd had lately felt like a minefield, and I was tired of stepping on explosives. When I finally dialed her number, my hand was shaking a little. She picked up on the second ring. "Ryan," she said, her voice clipped. "Where are you?" I sighed, already feeling the familiar weight pressing on my chest. "I'm coming home, but we need to talk first." There was a pause, just long enough for me to know this wasn't going to go well. "Talk about what?" she asked, her tone sharp. "About us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About how things have been for a long time now." Karen let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now you want to talk? After disappearing for 2 days? You're the one who walked out, Ryan." "I walked out because I couldn't take it anymore," I snapped, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like this is all my fault." Her silence lasted only a second. "I didn't make you sit in that corner all night and sulk, Ryan. You're the one who made it awkward for everyone, and then you left me to deal with it." The anger I'd been holding back started to bubble over. "Karen, do you even realize how exhausting this has been for me? I've been trying to keep things together for years. Years. And every time I try to tell you how I feel, it's like it doesn't matter to you." "That's not fair," she shot back. "I've tried, Ryan. I've done everything I can to make things work." "Have you?" I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you care more about what everyone else thinks than what's happening between us. You didn't confront me at that party because you cared about me. You did it because you were embarrassed." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought maybe my words had landed. But then she went cold again. "Are you seriously playing the victim right now?" she asked, her tone icy. "You're not the only one who's been struggling, Ryan. But you don't see me running away and hiding in a motel." I felt the last shred of patience snap. "You don't get it. You never have. And honestly, I don't know if you ever will." I hung up before she could respond, throwing my phone onto the bed and burying my face in my hands. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. It wasn't supposed to go like this. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting another barrage of texts from Karen, but it was Nathan. Nathan and I had been friends since college. He was one of the few people I trusted enough to talk about this stuff, though I hadn't told him everything. "Hey man," he said when I answered. "You okay?" "Not really," I admitted, leaning back against the headboard. "Karen and I just had it out on the phone." Nathan hesitated. "Yeah, she called me."
What?
I sat up straighter. "She wanted to know if I'd talk to you. I guess she's freaking out a little." I let out a bitter laugh. "She should be. I don't think she even realizes how bad things have gotten." Nathan sighed. "Ryan, I've known you two for a long time. You're both good people. But you've been carrying this for a while, haven't you?" I didn't respond right away. "Yeah," I finally said. "I have. And I didn't know how to tell her. Every time I tried, she'd brush it off, like I was overreacting or just being moody. I've been feeling invisible, man. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough." "Why didn't you tell me?" Nathan asked, his voice soft. "I didn't want to sound like a winner," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "And honestly, I kept hoping it would get better. That maybe she'd notice on her own." "She's not a mind reader, Ryan," Nathan said. "I'm not defending her, but if you don't tell her how you feel, she's not going to know." "I tried, Nathan," I said, my voice cracking. "I've tried so many times. But every time, she just doubles down, like it's all my fault. I can't keep doing this." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Look," Nathan said finally, "I'm not saying you're wrong. You're allowed to feel what you're feeling. But if you really want to fix this, you're going to have to meet her halfway." "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just think about it," Nathan said. "And if you need anything, you know I'm here." "Thanks," I said, ending the call. I sat there for a long time after we hung up, staring at the cheap motel art on the wall. Nathan's words stuck with me, even though I didn't want them to. I knew he was right in some ways. Karen wasn't a mind reader. But was it really all on me to fix this? To explain myself again and again, only to get nowhere? I didn't know. What I did know was that I couldn't stay in that motel room forever. It was time to go home, whether Karen and I were ready for it or not. I got to the coffee shop early. It was a quiet little place on the east side of town, tucked into a corner near some old brownstones. The kind of spot Karen used to love before life got too busy. Wooden tables with mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, and a smell that made you think of fresh bread and cinnamon. I picked a table by the window, partly so I could keep my back to the wall, but mostly because I needed something to stare at. The rain outside was light but steady, streaking the glass as I sat there nursing a black coffee that had gone cold. Karen showed up 10 minutes late, which didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how nervous she looked. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she was wearing a gray sweater I'd bought her years ago. She looked softer somehow. "Hey," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Hey." The silence that followed was thick, awkward. I wasn't sure who was supposed to start. She broke it first. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded. Figured it was time we talked. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, a tell I hadn't seen in a while. She used to do that back when we were dating, whenever she felt out of her depth. It was strange seeing it again now, after everything. "So," she said, her voice shaky, "where do we start?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I guess I just need to say it. I've been feeling like I've been carrying this relationship by myself for a long time, Karen, and it's wearing me down. Her eyes flicked up to mine, wide and startled, like she hadn't expected me to come out with it so directly. "Carrying it by yourself?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Ryan, that's not fair. I've been trying." "Have you?" I interrupted, the words sharper than I intended. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I've been putting everything into this, and you've just been coasting, showing up when it's convenient, but never really being here." Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue but didn't know how. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the push and pull between defensiveness and something else. "That's not how it feels to me," she said quietly. "I've been trying, Ryan. I really have. But I guess I didn't realize how bad things had gotten for you. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. It's not just the party, Karen. It's everything. I feel like I'm invisible to you half the time. Like you're more worried about keeping up appearances than actually being in this with me. Her face crumpled slightly, but she caught herself. That's not true, she said, her voice trembling. I care about you, Ryan. I care about us. Then why does it feel like I'm always the one fighting for this? I asked, my voice cracking despite my best effort to stay calm. The conversation stalled there for a moment, both of us staring down at our cups. That's when Catherine, the coffee shop owner, appeared at our table. Catherine was a petite woman in her 60s, with short silver hair and a smile that seemed to belong in a warmer place than Portland. She set a plate of biscotti between us without a word, her hands gentle as she adjusted the edges of the napkin beneath it. You two look like you could use something sweet, she said, her voice soft and kind. Karen managed a small, tight smile. Thank you. Catherine lingered for a moment, her gaze settling on Karen in a way that felt deliberate. You know, she said, her tone casual but laced with meaning, listening is an art, not a skill. Most people here to reply, not to understand. But if you can really listen, well, that's where the magic happens. Karen blinked, her expression caught between confusion and recognition. That's a good point, she said softly. Catherine patted her shoulder and walked away, leaving us alone again. Karen's hand reached for the biscotti, but she didn't eat it. She just turned it over in her fingers, her brow furrowed. I've been listening, she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper, but maybe not the right way. I looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, she hesitated, her eyes still fixed on the biscotti. I've been listening to you, but I think I've been listening to defend myself, to prove that I'm not the bad guy. And maybe I should have just been listening to you, to what you need. I wasn't sure what to say. This was the first time in a long time that I felt like she really saw me, like she wasn't just brushing me off. I don't want to lose you, Ryan, she said, her voice breaking. You won't, I said softly, though I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it. But this has to change, Karen. I can't keep going like this. She nodded, her eyes shiny with unshed tears. I know. I'll do better. I promise. We sat there for a while longer, the biscotti untouched between us, the rain still streaking the window. It wasn't a resolution, not really, but it felt like the first step towards something better. When I walked back through the front door, the house didn't feel like home. It looked the same as always, clean and orderly, Karen's favorite candles burning faintly on the living room table. But there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. Karen stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I came in, her smile small and tentative. Hey, I said, setting my bag down near the door. Maya and Ethan peeked out from the hallway, their voices dropping to whispers when they saw me. I gave them a small wave, and they hesitated before coming into the room. Maya, at 10, was more perceptive than I liked sometimes, her hazel eyes darting between me and Karen. Ethan, only 7, clung to her side, his face unsure. Hi, Dad, Maya said carefully. Hey, sweetheart. I crouched down, pulling her and Ethan into a quick hug. Their small arms wrapped around me tightly, and I felt the sting of guilt settle deeper in my chest. Whatever Karen and I were going through, they didn't deserve to get caught in the middle. That first week back, Karen really tried. She held back the sharp comments that used to come so easily, the ones that always felt like tiny cuts she pretended not to notice. She asked me how my day was when I came home from work, even if her attention didn't last long enough to hear the answer. I wanted to believe it was real, that this was the start of something better. But the cracks showed quickly. It started small, the way these things always do. One night, Karen decided to make a special family dinner, pulling out old recipes she hadn't touched in years. She wanted the kids to set the table with the good plates, the ones we only used on holidays. But everything went wrong. The chicken burned in the oven. Maya spilled juice all over the counter. Ethan complained loudly that he didn't like asparagus. Karen's frustration boiled over, and by the time we sat down, she was seething. This was supposed to be nice, she snapped when Ethan started poking at his plate with a fork. It's fine, I said quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Dinner's great, Karen. Oh, is it, Ryan? She shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because it looks like no one's enjoying it. I glanced at the kids, who sat frozen in their chairs. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, while Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. Karen, I said quietly, trying to keep my tone calm. Let it go. It's not a big deal. She glared at me, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I could see the words forming in her mind, the cutting remark she wanted to make, but she swallowed it down. The silence at the table was deafening. The next week, we fought about money. I'd been looking for a financial document, a receipt for one of the kids' school expenses, but it wasn't where it should have been. I spent half an hour tearing apart the desk in the office before I finally asked Karen if she'd seen it. It's probably in one of the drawers, she said without looking up from her laptop. I've already checked the drawers, I said, my frustration creeping into my voice. Well, I don't know, Ryan, she snapped. Maybe if you'd kept better track of it, you wouldn't have lost it. I froze, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Really? That's where you're going with this? I said, my voice rising. You're the one who's always moving things around. It's not lost because of me. Oh, so now this is my fault? She shot back, standing up from the couch. I didn't say that, I snapped. But maybe, just once, you could take some responsibility instead of pointing fingers. The fight spiraled from there, the document forgotten in the heat of old wounds being dragged to the surface. By the time it was over, I was in the car, driving to my brother Paul's place, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. Paul was waiting for me on the porch when I pulled up, a beer already in his hand. You look like hell, he said, handing me a bottle as I sat down beside him. Thanks, I muttered, taking a long drink. So, what happened this time? He asked. I gave him the short version. Karen's effort to change, the arguments that kept breaking through, the feeling that no matter what we did, we couldn't stop hurting each other. Paul listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he took a long sip of his beer and let out a heavy sigh. Ryan, I've known you two for years, he said, and I've always thought you were good together. But man, you've been unhappy for a long time. You think it's worth it? Staying, I mean? I stared out at the dark yard, the weight of his question settling over me. I don't know, I admitted. I thought maybe we could fix it. But now, it just feels like we're going in circles. Paul nodded again. Look, I can't tell you what to do. But you've got two kids to think about, and they need you to be okay. You can't keep pouring from an empty cup, man. When I went back home the next morning, Karen was waiting for me in the kitchen. I'm sorry, she said before I could say anything. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were tired, worn. I know you are, I said, leaning against the counter. But I can't do this anymore, Karen. I'm done trying to make this work by myself. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. What do we tell the kids? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. We tell them the truth. That we love them, and this isn't their fault. Karen nodded again, wiping at her eyes. As I packed a bag later that day, Maya stood in the doorway of my room, her small frame silhouetted against the light. Are you leaving again? She asked, her voice trembling. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. Yeah, sweetheart. But it's not because of you, okay? I'll always be here for you and Ethan. Always. She nodded against my chest, and I held her a little tighter, trying to ignore the ache in my heart. When I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I didn't think it would come to this. When I sat down with my lawyer, I told him I wanted to be fair, generous, even. It wasn't about punishing Karen or getting back at her for all the fights and years of feeling unseen. I just wanted to make this as painless as possible, especially for Maya and Ethan. We'll draft a 50-50 custody arrangement, my lawyer, Mark, said as he flipped through his notes. And I'll outline child support payments that'll ensure the kid's stability. It's a clean proposal, Ryan. She'd be hard-pressed to contest it, I nodded, barely listening. The weight of what I was doing made my stomach churn. This wasn't just paperwork. It was the official end of something we'd spent over a decade building. Do you think she'll fight it? I asked quietly. Mark gave me a measured look. She might. Divorce is emotional, even in the best circumstances. But legally, you're offering her fair terms. It's up to her if she wants to drag it out. The conversation with Karen when she got the papers wasn't easy. She sat stiffly on the couch, the stack of documents in front of her. I stood across the room, leaning against the kitchen counter, keeping as much distance between us as possible. You didn't waste any time, did you? She said, her voice low but sharp. It's not about time, I said. It's about making this easier for everyone, especially the kids. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Easier for you, maybe? I clenched my jaw, taking a deep breath before responding. I didn't want this, Karen, but we both know we're past the point of fixing things. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she picked up the papers and said, Fine. If this is what you want, I'll sign them. A few weeks after I moved out, Maya and Ethan started talking about Jenna around Karen. Jenna made pancakes with chocolate chips for breakfast, Ethan said, bouncing in his chair during our weekly drop-off. She lets me flip them with the spatula. I could feel Karen's eyes on me as Ethan chattered away, her expression a mix of confusion and something sharper. She's Daddy's friend, Maya added carefully, glancing between us like she was trying to gauge how Karen would react. She's really nice. Karen didn't say much, just nodded and forced a smile. But I could tell it stung. Jenna wasn't a replacement for Karen. I hadn't even meant for her to become part of my life. We'd met through a mutual friend a few months after I left the house, and things just happened. She was kind and calm in a way that felt easy, like I didn't have to explain myself all the time. She listened, really listened, without turning everything into an argument. When she met the kids, she didn't try to take over or force a connection. She let it happen naturally, which I respected. But I knew Karen wouldn't see it that way. One night, after the kids had spent the weekend with me and Jenna, Maya came home with a clay pot she'd made at an art studio Jenna had taken them to. She said, I'm really good at sculpting, Maya told Karen, setting the pot carefully on the counter. That's nice, Karen said, her voice tight. Maya looked up at her, hesitating for a moment. Mom, are you okay? Karen blinked, then forced another smile. Of course, sweetie. That's a beautiful pot. When I picked the kids up the next weekend, Karen barely looked at me. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? She said as I helped Ethan with his jacket. I frowned, confused. What are you talking about? This whole thing, she said, her voice low but sharp enough that Ethan flinched. Starting over, playing happy family with someone new. I sighed, my shoulders sagging. Karen, it's not like that. Jenna isn't replacing you. No one could. Tell that to the kids, she snapped. They talk about her like she's the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're happy, Karen, I said, my voice firm. Isn't that what matters? Her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't say anything else. A few days later, Mark called to say Karen had signed the papers. It's done, he said. You'll get the official confirmation in a couple of weeks. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring out the window. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was empty. When I told Paul, he nodded like he'd been expecting it. You did what you had to do, he said. Doesn't mean it feels good, I muttered, taking a sip of my beer. Good's not the point, Ryan, Paul said. The point is you stopped dragging yourself through something that wasn't working. Now you can focus on the kids and maybe yourself for a change. That night, when I dropped the kids off at Karen's, Ethan hugged me tight and whispered, I wish you could stay. I knelt down, looking him in the eye. I'm always here for you, buddy. Even if I'm not in the same house, you and Maya will always have me, okay? He nodded, but his lip quivered as he ran inside. Maya gave me a small wave from the door, her face serious in a way that didn't belong on a 10-year-old. As I drove away, I felt the weight of everything we'd lost. The papers were signed. The marriage was over. But for the first time in years, I felt like I might actually be able to breathe again. I didn't hear much about Karen's life after the divorce. We kept things polite for the kids, exchanging short updates during drop-offs and pickups, but I knew she wasn't doing great. Her smiles were tight and forced, and there was something behind her eyes that made her look lost. I'd be lying if I said I didn't care. But after everything we'd been through, I also knew I couldn't fix it for her. Maya and Ethan brought her up more than I expected. "Mom went to some event last night," Maya said one afternoon while we were making lunch. "What kind of event?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Like a dating thing," Maya said, wrinkling her nose. "A speed dating thing," Ethan chimed in, giggling. "Mom said it was super weird." I nodded, not sure how to respond. Part of me felt relieved she was trying to move on, but another part, the part one wasn't proud of, felt annoyed. It wasn't fair, I knew that. I'd moved on first, and Jenna had become a part of the kids' lives. Still, the idea of Karen sitting in a bar, trying to impress a room full of strangers, made me uneasy. Karen didn't bring it up the next time I saw her, but she didn't have to. I could tell something was different. She looked tired, like the weight of everything we'd been through was finally catching up with her. When she handed me Ethan's backpack, her hand lingered on the strap for just a second too long. "Everything okay?" I asked, surprising myself. She hesitated, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but then she shook her head. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't push her. A few weeks later, I found out she'd started therapy. Maya mentioned it casually during dinner. "Mom has this new journal," she said, between bites of spaghetti. "What kind of journal?" I asked, wiping a bit of sauce off Ethan's face. "I don't know," Maya said. "She writes in it after her therapy sessions." I froze, my fork hovering mid-air. "Therapy?" Maya nodded. "Yeah. She said she's trying to figure some stuff out." That hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd begged Karen to meet me halfway, to look at herself and see how her actions were affecting us. She never did, at least, not while we were together. And now, after everything had fallen apart, she was finally doing it. It was frustrating, sure, but it also made me feel something else. Something closer to hope. One evening, I got a call from Paul. "Ran into Karen the other day," he said, his voice casual. "Yeah?" I asked, leaning back on the couch. "She seemed different," he said. "Calmer." We talked for a bit, and she mentioned she's seeing a therapist. I let out a slow breath. "Yeah, the kids told me." Paul paused, then added, "Look, man, I know things ended rough between you two, but it sounds like she's trying. Maybe she's starting to get it." "Maybe," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. The next time I saw Karen, she brought up the therapy herself. It was after Ethan's soccer game, the kids running ahead to the car. She stood next to me on the sidelines, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the field. "I've been seeing someone," she said, her voice hesitant. "A therapist." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "That's good." "It is," she said quickly, like she needed to convince herself. "It's hard, though. A lot harder than I thought it would be." "I get that," I said. She looked at me then, her eyes softer than I'd seen them in years. I wanted to say I'm sorry, Ryan, for not listening to you, for not trying harder when it mattered." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that we were past apologies. But another part, the part that remembered why I fell in love with her in the first place, felt strangely lighter. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." She nodded, a small, tentative smile breaking through. That night, as I watched the kids play a board game with Jenna, I thought about Karen's words. Maybe we couldn't fix what we had. Maybe the damage was too deep, and we were too different now. But knowing she was working on herself, on being a better version of herself for Maya and Ethan, gave me a strange kind of peace. For the first time since the divorce, it felt like we were both moving forward. ####, Chapter 8. Moving forward. When Karen started changing, I noticed it first through the kids. It wasn't something they said outright, but little comments would slip out here and there. Ethan talked about how Mom was hanging out with us more, and Maya mentioned that Karen had started helping with school projects in a way that felt different, not rushed or critical, but patient and present. "She's been writing in a journal," Maya said one afternoon while we were sitting at the kitchen table, working on her math homework. She says it helps her think about stuff. What kind of stuff? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Maya shrugged. I don't know. Grown-up stuff, I guess. But she seems happier. That stopped me. Happier wasn't a word I'd heard associated with Karen in a long time. The kids were the first to bring up the trip to Forest Park. Mom took us hiking last weekend, Ethan said over dinner, his fork scraping the last bit of spaghetti from his plate. We went to the spot with the big clearing and saw the whole city. Did you have fun? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Yeah. She let us bring snacks and everything. And Maya took a million pictures on her phone. Maya rolled her eyes but smiled. It was nice. She didn't rush us or anything. That comment stuck with me. Karen had always been the type to rush, to move through moments without really being in them. Hearing that she'd slowed down, that she'd let the kids set the pace, was new. A few weeks later, I ran into Paul at a brewery downtown. She's doing the work, he said after we caught up about the kids. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Karen, he said. I bumped into her last week, and we talked for a while. She mentioned therapy, journaling, all of it. She's really trying, man. I sipped my beer, nodding. Yeah. The kids have noticed, too. You're happy, right? Paul asked, his tone cautious. I thought about Jenna, about the calm and steadiness she brought to my life, about how the kids lit up when they were with her. Yeah, I said. I am. Good, Paul said. Because it sounds like Karen's finally finding her footing, too. That's good for the kids. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew he was right. The next time I dropped the kids off at Karen's, I watched as she knelt down to hug them both. Did you have fun with Dad? She asked, her voice warm. Yeah, Ethan said, holding up the model rocket we'd built together. We launched it in the park, and it went so high. Karen grinned, ruffling his hair. That's awesome, buddy. Maya handed her a small stack of Polaroids Jenna had taken of the launch. Jenna said you'd like these, she said. Karen's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. Thanks, sweetheart. I'll hang them on the fridge. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw her standing in the doorway, the kids laughing at her side. For the first time in years, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Not as a couple, but as parents. Looking back, I realized now that Karen and I weren't built to last. We loved each other, but we didn't know how to nurture that love when things got hard. But seeing her grow, watching her become the kind of parent our kids deserve, it gave me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. We'd both made mistakes, but we were both moving forward. And that was enough. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a golden glow over the chaos of breakfast. Ethan, now 12, was trying to convince his sister Maya to trade her last pancake for his slightly burned one. Maya, at 15, wasn't having it. You burned yours, you eat it, she said, smirking as she drizzled syrup over hers. Dad. Ethan groaned, looking to me for backup. Nice try, buddy, I said, grinning as I flipped another pancake onto a plate. But Maya's got a point. You can't hustle your sister with burnt pancakes. Ethan muttered something under his breath but grabbed his plate and sat at the table, where Jenna was helping our 2-year-old daughter, Lily, navigate her tiny fork. Do you like the pancakes, sweetheart? Jenna asked, brushing a strand of curly hair from Lily's face. Yummy, Lily declared, her voice bright and excited. She clapped her syrup-sticky hands, earning a laugh from Jenna. I watched them, my heart full in a way I hadn't thought possible 5 years ago. Jenna had been my anchor through some of the hardest times in my life. Marrying her 2 years ago felt like the culmination of everything I'd been searching for. Stability, love, and a true partner who saw me for who I was. Maya and Ethan had adjusted well over the years. They still split their time between our house and Karen's, and while I'd initially worried about how they'd handle all the changes, they'd grown into resilient, thoughtful kids. Maya was thriving in high school, already talking about college and her interest in architecture. She spent hours sketching designs in her notebook, some of which were surprisingly good. Ethan, on the other hand, had taken to soccer like he was born for it. He played midfield for his club team, and I never missed a game. Watching him grow into such a confident, driven kid was one of the greatest joys of my life. Karen and I had settled into a place I never thought we'd reach: mutual respect. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still occasional disagreements about the kids, how to handle curfews, who was paying for what extracurriculars. But we'd learned to communicate better. Therapy had been good for her, and while she'd never said it outright, I could see she'd carried those lessons forward. She'd started her own business consulting for small companies, which gave her the flexibility to be there for the kids in a way she hadn't been before. She seemed happier, more grounded. And though it had taken me a while to get used to the idea, Karen had a serious boyfriend now. Paul, of all people, said he'd met the guy at a friend's wedding and that he seemed like a solid guy. Maya and Ethan liked him, too, which was what mattered most to me. As I sat down at the table, Jenna handed me a fresh cup of coffee, her hand lingering on my shoulder. "We're going to need more pancakes," she said, her voice warm and teasing. "On it," I said, standing up to grab the batter. Lily giggled and reached for me, her chubby arms stretching as I picked her up. She nestled her head against my chest, and I kissed the top of her curls, breathing in that faintly sweet baby smell. Ethan looked up from his plate, his face suddenly serious. "Hey, Dad, do you think Lily will be good at soccer when she's older?" I laughed. "Well, if she takes after you, she'll be a star midfielder by the time she's 5. And if she takes after you, she'll burn her pancakes," Maya said with a grin. "Hey now," I said, raising an eyebrow as they both laughed. Later that evening, after the chaos of the day had settled, I stood in the backyard with Jenna, watching the kids play. The autumn air was cool, and the sky was streaked with shades of pink and orange. Jenna leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly. "All the time," I said, wrapping an arm around her. I thought about Karen, about the broken pieces we both carried, and the work it took to rebuild ourselves. I thought about Maya and Ethan, how they'd grown into such remarkable people despite everything. And I thought about now, this life we'd built, a life full of love, laughter, and second chances. "I never thought I'd get here," I said after a moment, "but I'm glad I did." Jenna smiled, her eyes shining as she looked up at me. "Me too." Lily's laughter echoed through the yard as Ethan chased her around the grass, and Maya sat on the porch steps, sketching something in her notebook. For the first time in years, I felt whole, and I knew, without a doubt, that we were exactly where we were meant to be. When a relationship falls apart, who's truly at fault? And can two people find clarity in the wreckage of their shared life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Deceived Buddy so you never miss an update on more real-life stories. And as always, see you in the next video.